Hello and welcome to my first proper video. So today we're going to be talking about what is Australia's foreign policy, and this will of course be an analysis of Australia's official foreign policy. So first of all, I'd like to make a disclaimer that everything discussed in this video is the opinion of Australian Savants and Australian Savant alone. Don't take my word as gospel. I am not an expert. This is just my opinion. This video is basically for me. And I encourage you to do your own research in this topic and all other topics in life. Don't trust anyone you see online. So, first of all, what does foreign policy actually mean? So, according to Oxford Languages, it is a government strategy in dealing with other nations, which is a pretty good broad definition. I think that summarizes it. According to Britannica, it is the general objectives that guide the activities and relationships of one state in its interactions with other states. State not being Queensland, New South Wales, etc., but the country itself, the sovereign body governing that country. And diplomacy is the tool of foreign policy, and war, alliances, and international trade may be all in manifestations of it. So that's a cool little thing I've added there. So now we know what foreign policy is. We can go on to what we will be analysing, which is Australia's 2017 Foreign Policy White Paper. So this is Australia's official foreign policy as of 2017. What is a white paper? Well, this one's a 136-page document, but the official definition by Wikipedia is a report or guide that informs readers concisely about a complex issue and presents the issuing body's philosophy on the matter. It is meant to help readers understand an issue, solve a problem, or make a decision. So it's basically summarizing Australia's foreign policy as of 2017. So in this video, I'll provide an overview of the white paper. I'll set the scene of Australia in foreign affairs. Then I'll talk about how Australia is a liberal state in a liberal world order. I'll talk about what's behind Australia's public diplomacy, and I'll offer some closing thoughts on the topic. So first of all, who was responsible for authoring the 2017 Australia Foreign Policy White Paper? Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, Julie Bishop, the Minister for Foreign Affairs at the time, and Stephen Chalbo. I don't know how to say that, but he was the Minister for Trade, Tourism, and Investment at the time. Um, um, it was published by DFAT, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, of course. They were the ones that actually wrote it, but these three people are the ones who signed off on it. So an overview of the white paper. So this is a summary of the key things that they claim that Australia is going to do in foreign affairs. So mainly they want to uphold the US-led rules-based global order. They want to deter protectionism. They want to navigate the US-China strategic rivalry, develop the Indo-Pacific region. They note the unprecedented period of globalization we are in. They note the dwindling of US leadership. They want to diversify trade into these countries, and they want to secure Australia from cyber attacks and foreign interference. So to set the scene of Australia for you guys, um, this is a quote directly from the white paper. Australia does not define its national identity by race or religion, but by shared values, including political, economic, and religious freedom, liberal democracy, the rule of law, racial and gender equality, and mutual respect. This is apparently how we define ourselves. Furthermore, we are one of the eldest democracies in the world. We are a highly multicultural country with 26 of Australians born overseas, and 50% are either born overseas or at least have one foreign parent. We are less than 0.5% of the world's population, which about, I think we've got 22 million or so people, but we produce 7% of all published research. So we like our education. And 1 in 5 Australian jobs are trade related. Exporting firms hire more people and pay higher wages than those focusing on the domestic market alone. So we're very trade oriented as a country, obviously through our coal, iron ore, liquefied natural gases, even our education sector. They're probably our biggest exports. An economic truth, however, is that this is by Reserve Bank of Australia, our central bank, the RBA. They wrote this this is just a quote from their report in 2019. A slowdown in Chinese economic activity of around 5% could result in a decline in Australian GDP of up to 2.5%. So, what this means is that Australia's economy, at least at the time of 2017, was so much dependent on China that if China fell by 5%, ours would also fall by half that amount. That's how linked and intertwined we are. So, I'll move on to Australia being a liberal state in a liberal world order. So from the foreign policy white paper, basically, it's very clear that we are a liberal state and we like the liberal world order that the US has led since 1945. Um, what is liberalism in international relations, or IR? Well, liberalism is an IR theory, ideology, or school of thought. It focuses on wealth and prosperity over security and power, focuses on absolute gains opposed to relative gains, meaning that if our if our economic production increases, that's good. We don't really care if our economic production increases at a slower rate in another country, which is in comparison to another school of thought called realism. International trade and globalization is something that liberalists in IR prioritize because it's a means of reducing conflict. So by this, it basically means if countries become interdependent via trade, as in they rely on each other for certain goods and resources and business, etc., they will be less likely to go to war because it would disrupt their economic prosperity. So they become linked via trade. Um, and we also very much focus on international institutions like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, etc., as a means of peacefully settling disputes. So we can go to these multilateral forums and discuss problems that we have with each other, countries that is, instead of just going to war or unilaterally doing something that will annoy the other state or cause harm to that state. So I'm just taking a sip of water. And lastly, we also like to spread democracy. America is definitely the biggest state that does that, particularly during the Cold War era. Um, and the reason for spreading democracy is because it reduces the likelihood of war. And this is based on what's known as the democratic peace theory, which is that for some reason, democracies are extremely unlikely to go to war compared to other states. So two democracies are very unlikely to fight each other. There's like no cases basically of that ever happening in history. Um, and what is the rules-based global order? It's a liberal world order. So it's a world order basically means like the status quo of all states in the international stage, which is just like how they interact between each other through like yeah, when they interact, they're operating in a global order, and that global order is based on liberal values, which are described here. The US created this rules based global order after they were the victors of World War II when they established the Bretton Woods system, um, the GATT, which turned into the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, etc. They basically created a bunch of multilateral institutions where countries would be forced to go to if they wanted to do anything, and they had to abide by extensive lists of rules. So basically, it bound countries by agreed upon rules, and they had to operate by those rules. And if they didn't, they would be punished by the entire um, international community. So all countries would punish one country if they broke it. So there was an incentive to follow the rules. Because if you didn't follow the rules, you'd be punished, mostly by sanctions through the World Trade Organization. So they created institutions because they wanted to promote liberal values, which they believed in, as it furthered their national interests. The reason they could create it was because they were so powerful at the time. They were the hegemon, which means they were so powerful that even if there was a coalition or a group of countries that banded together to fight America, America would still win because they were so powerful. And Australia has benefited greatly from the post World War II US led liberal rules based international order, bunch of words. Um, and for that reason, we like to, at least officially, DFAT likes to uphold that order. So just take another sip of water. Basically means that we like people following the rules and we like trade, etc. Um, so the white paper is basically 100% liberal, um, and I'll explain why. Our foreign policy is basically just promote liberalism and be a liberal state, um, and support the US in leading that world order because we benefit from it. So, in the white paper, they claim that we will maintain peace in the Indo-Pacific, which the Indo-Pacific is this geographical term that's been introduced. It used to just be the Asia Pacific, but now we've started using the term Indo-Pacific, which, if you look at a map, sorry, I don't have a screenshot in this slide, which is a failure on my part to visually show you, but it basically expands instead of just the Pacific Ocean and Southeast Asia, basically, we expand to Western like India and all the way up to the Middle East and Africa, that whole Indian Ocean. So it's like a form of marketing or public diplomacy to transition to this term of Indo-Pacific, meaning that we want to increase our involvement in that region as well as just the Asia Pacific, um, which I'll get to later about why we want to do that or why DFAT has chosen to do that. We want to deter protectionism. We want to stop countries from hindering free trade because we don't benefit from not having free trade because we believe in liberalism. We want to maintain open economies and free. Yep. Uphold. Yeah. Australia's based on. Yep. Yeah, they literally said this. They want to deter protectionism at all costs in the paper. Um, so we're very attached to the liberal ideology. And yes, so they contrast the liberal rules-based global order with a world order based on power alone, which would mean that they're referring to China, which is overtaking America in wealth and power, and that means that they will have the opportunity to create their own world order, which some argue they've already started to do, um, by forming their own institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Belt and Road Initiative, etc. And that will be based, according to some people, on power opposed to rules. So the dominant powers can basically do whatever they want at the expense of the weaker powers, which is a very realist um, ideology opposed to a liberal ideology. Continuing on for that, so on institutionalism, which is like a sub theory of liberalism, is basically a means of promoting liberalism by basically using institutions. So in the white paper, it says that we're going to continue supporting the Financial Stability Board and institution. We have a blah blah blah. The International Monetary Fund. Um, we work in the World Customs Organization, the World Intellectual Property Organization, the World Trade Organization is fundamental to our prosperity. We engage in the global 20 economies, the G20 and the International Monetary Fund is of great importance. So basically, we like our institutions and we are heavily involved in them. And the reason for that is that if we have a say in these institutions, we can control and influence other countries' behaviors in a way that benefits us. That's why we want to engage in these institutions. Um, and we do recognize officially China's supremacy, and we want to encourage them to lead the same order America has. So that we want them to become the leaders of the order that America established, which is respect for international law, caring about security, and not bullying weaker states. That's what we want China to do. And they talk about them being a responsible stakeholder in global governance. Continuing on, Australia has a history of engaging in shaping rules via the Chemical Weapons Convention, the Arms Trade Treaty, digital trade, internet governance, global health standard. Blah, blah. We're basically very much involved. These are what we're involved in if you want to read it, but we're involved in institutions and shaping the rules. We will encourage countries to ratify treaties, making them bound to think. It's basically reducing uncertainty and risk and making sure that they follow what they say they're going to do. Deter people to not break said treaties and international law by supporting the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, so holding them accountable to the rules they break. I can go on. I can go on about how these types of things are just blanket statements because they don't really have any teeth. These two institutions, as well as the UN for that matter, they don't really have any power to enforce anything. It's kind of just, I don't want to say propaganda, but kind because it's meant to be positive. I don't know. These, this is basically bullshit. Sorry for lack of a better word, because they're not going to really do it. There's so many instances of this not happening, and when Western powers break international law, they're not held accountable in these two institutions. So it's a one-sided power dynamic where we want our enemies, in quotation marks for lack of a better word, to be held accountable, but not ourselves. You can look into that as well. And going on, more specific examples of how we've been involved in institutions. Yep. So here's our trade statistics. This is excluding education, which isn't one of our major exports. But you can see China is an overwhelmingly large export destination. So a large part of our GDP is based on exports to China, specifically in iron ore, coal. Oh, it does include education. I don't know why it says that down there. That's funny. And gold and natural gas. China's by large our biggest export destination and also our import, the country we import the most from. So talk about this will become important later on. So now I'm going to talk about what's behind all of Australia's public diplomacy, which is kind of that propaganda stuff I was talking about. Basically, like saying how good Australia is and convincing other countries that Australia is good. So what's behind all of that, like the marketing and public relations, etc. What's going on behind closed doors, behind the scenes? So to understand that, we need to look at what's been happening over the last few decades, and also understand how small Australia is. So Australia is known as a middle power, meaning they don't have a lot of power themselves. They have to rely on other countries known as great powers or superpowers for us to be successful in the world. So this is it's like PPP, the purchasing power parity. It's kind of like GDP, but in terms of uh, um, international currency. So taking into account exchange rates, etc. So for example, in China, purchasing a white T-shirt is cheaper than purchasing a white T-shirt in the United States, and it takes that into account and adjusts for it. So according to that, China's already overtaken the United States in 2016, and by 2030, it's going to be even much bigger. And this is basically the biggest power transition since World War II, when the US basically overtook the British Empire. This is what's going to happen if it's happening right now, and it'll happen over the next couple decades. China is going to overtake the United States as the leading country, which is also already starting to be seen by the US um, becoming more protectionist, nationalist, and populist, particularly through Trump's presidency from 2016 to 2020 when he left the World Health Organization, left a bunch of trade treaties and turned inward, put America first, became nationalist, stopped being the leader of the rules-based global order, basically, um, which basically is giving the opportunity for a country like China to create or lead their own world order. Um, so they're gonna China will increasingly start to influence the world order and how other countries operate and how they can operate. So this is very important because as a middle power, um, should our allegiance remain with the United States or should it be with China? Can we have both? Who knows? Obviously, maybe I'll talk about it later, but we rely on the US for military deterrence. They offer to protect us. Um, if anyone attacked Australia, the United States would come to our aid. We don't have nuclear weapons, the US does. If anyone tried to nuke Australia, the US would nuke them back. So it's a deterrence. No one's going to nuke Australia because they know that the US would nuke them back. So we rely on the US for security and we rely on China for our economic prosperity. And the big question is, can we maintain both of those, or will one of those countries ask us to stop relying on the other or stop having ties with us because we have ties with the other? Which I'll get to later. So, in the white paper, we talk a lot about diversification, which means that DFAT is looking at um, stopping our trade with China, or at least China being such a big export destination, and looking to other countries to export to, so we're not so reliant on China, which goes back to that RBA statistic of how economically intertwined our two states are. I won't analyze that yet, but we're looking at diversifying into Latin America, the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. Um, India and Japan will be really important, as well as Indonesia and Vietnam going forward. Relations with Africa, with a 1.2 billion population, expected to double by 2050, which is amazing. Like, that's just insane. Through the Global Innovation Strategy, we're creating 5 landing pads in Berlin, San Francisco, Tel Aviv, Shanghai, and Singapore. So Shanghai, we're staying in China, but a lot of these other ones are looking at diversifying away from China. And this is for businesses to become connected internationally and innovate together and share ideas. So yeah, now I'll actually talk about our reliance on the US. And is Australia just a proxy state for America? So in the white paper, we do admit that we have a big reliance on the US presence in the Indo-Pacific to maintain the rules-based global order because they're so powerful and we are not comparatively. Um, and this is a direct quote, they will shape a region. We want to shape a regional balance in favor of our interests. And the means of doing that is supporting America to uphold the rules-based global order in our region. Um, the question is that a viable strategy, and is it a strategy that we should be pursuing? They say that we want to maintain strong ties with NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is basically a US-led alliance. Um, not in the white paper because COVID in August came afterward, but they didn't. I don't think they really even mentioned the Quad. So the Quad is known as a quadrilateral security dialogue between Australia, India, Japan, and America. It's like in the media, you'll obviously read that it's all about containing China. So this is what I'm talking about behind the public diplomacy. Australia has basically taken on the strategy of containing China and supporting America, and we've seen increasingly that we will do whatever America does. We'll follow what they do. So the US has a strategic rivalry with China. As seen here, China's overtaking the United States, which means they'll have power to change the world order, which means the US won't be able to dictate that world order, and China will, and the US obviously doesn't like that. So they have a strategic rivalry with China, but does Australia I don't think so. But that's not that's just my opinion. Um, but regardless, we are assuming that we do, and we are choosing to side with America. And there's been people saying basically that we're a proxy for America. Basically, America controls us, and we'll do whatever they say, and we're not independent, which means we basically don't have sovereignty over our own nation. So there's a scene through the COVID-19 call out, which resulted in sanctions against Australia. Um, you can look into that. That proponent like people think that US basically told us to do that, and we did it, and it hurt us, but we got closer with it. America, same with AUKUS. AUKUS was so public. It's basically publicly saying, "Hey guys, hey China, Australia, the UK, and the US are banding together militarily. We're together, and we're against you." That's the interpretation of it. Um, it's like an $80 billion contract, and we very much worsened our relations with the French because of the submarine deal we had with them, and we didn't even tell them about AUKUS, and we just cut it off. Um, so it's signaling to the public that yes, we're coming closer, and we are willing to sacrifice a relationship with France, and we're publicly saying to China, "Hey, look at us, we're powerful together." It's kind of I don't know. Then I should do an analysis on all like should we? I guess I will look into it when I make a video later on. Jeff Raby, the former ambassador, Australian ambassador to China, wrote a book released very recently that I've read and taken notes on. I'll release a video on that, which kind of goes on about um, should we have a foreign policy of containing China, or should we not? Should we go away from America? Soft power. So from the white paper, this is a direct quote. It's basically soft power is in comparison to hard power, where hard power is things like economic coercion and things like our military power. So it's coercive power, which is opposed to soft power, which is through persuasion. It's not threatening. It's not going to cause resentment by using it, whereas hard power will. And Australia, while weak in hard power compared to the great powers, we're very strong in soft power. So we're a desirable destination. Lots of people want to migrate here and live here because of our political freedom, our rule of law, human rights, good living standards, all that type of stuff. It's a great place to live, and the values we have are things that a lot of other people living in other countries wish that they could experience. Um, so yeah, we're basically using that to build a coalition to contain China and win the hearts and minds of regional states via aid and climate change pledges. Um, so specifically, we're looking at the UK, EU, Japan, New Zealand, and Canada because they're like-minded nations to form that coalition. Um, we're increasing relations with Papua New Guinea and Timor-Leste and other Pacific Island countries, as basically via our presence in the Pacific Islands Forum and institution. Increase trade and investment in the Pacific, so basically boost economic prosperity in the Pacific. We've got all of these working schemes to encourage migration to Australia and make it easier for people who want to work here in Pacific Islands, of course. Mm, reduce costs for Pacific Islands. Um, disaster relief, so cyclone reactions and fishery monitoring, sustainable food source. Um, Nauru and Tuvalu establish border security and help fight transnational crime. We're using aid and just helping all these regional countries in the Pacific Island region to basically make them like us and um, side with us in international disputes and conflicts. We're trying to win them over. Um, and this is all from the foreign policy white paper. It's all official um, from DFAT. So closing thoughts. I'd just like to. I think these are the questions we've got to ask. Are we really threatened by China's rise? I know America is, but is Australia? Do we really need to take on that threat by being an American proxy? Do we really need to take that on? What are the alternatives? What else can we do to not cause such a division between the West and China? Is there something else that we can do that doesn't cause such a divide where we can work with both countries and not face consequences? Is it possible to maintain strong ties with both states? Have we irreversibly damaged our relationship with China? That's a big one. With AUKUS and the Quad and the call out for the inspection, the inquiry into the origins of COVID-19. Um, taken a very public, strong stance to side with America. Will China forgive us for doing that? Is it possible? And what is really in Australia's interests? I think we need people to define that much more clearly. I think like the so we've sided with America in all the wars that didn't affect us necessarily in the past. Throughout history, we've always taken their side just straight away. I think people need to look at, is that necessary? Is that in our interest, or is there something else we can do that doesn't cause a divide? Yeah. Anyway, thank you for watching my first video analysing Australia's official foreign policy and providing some of my thoughts. In the next video I'll make, I think it will be Jeff Raby's book that I mentioned previously. He's very, very smart. I like him. I liked his book a lot. I don't know when that will be. I've got tons of notes I'll have to organize for that. And then I might do the 2020 strategic update for the defense white paper, which goes hand in hand with the foreign policy white paper. Um, and and then I've got a book by Ray Dalio that I'll do after that, which is Why Nations Succeed and Fail, the Changing World Order. Looking forward to it. Hope you learned something from this, and do remember this disclaimer. Um, don't take anything I say too seriously. It's basically for me. Please, if I have anyone watching this video, provide your thoughts in the comment box below. Subscribe and like for more. Tell your friends and family if you like this sort of stuff. You want to be educated on this sort of stuff, or start thinking about this sort of stuff. Yeah. So see you in the next video. Cheers.